I'm going to go ahead and take a moment to introduce our moderator to everyone tonight. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce him, an ordained minister, a civil rights advocate, and a member of the Supreme Court Bar, and my good friend, Reverend Barry Lynn. Barry has spent decades at the intersection of law, religious, and social justice, and is a champion of the First Amendment and the separation of church and state. He's also a frequent guest on John Fugelsang's popular Sirius XM progress show, Tell Me Everything. Barry, you ran Americans United for separation of church and state for a quarter of a century. So you're very familiar with what we now call Christian nationalism. So I'm wondering if maybe you could take a moment and chat a little bit about your experience with that while we're waiting for John to join us.
Be happy to do that, Ellen. I've been fighting the religious right, I guess, my entire adult life. And it started not even with Americans United, but when I was legislative counsel for the American Civil Liberties Union office in Washington. I remember the very first day I worked for the ACLU was the day that the Senate was beginning deliberations on a school prayer amendment to allow states and local school districts to have organized prayer back in public schools. Of course, it had been outlawed uh, by Supreme Court decisions decades before. And I was sent out to something called the Swamp, which is an area outside of the United States Capitol. I don't know why it was called the Swamp initially, but I sure know why it was called it that day, because it was a tremendous rainstorm. And as I was giving interviews about what the ACLU thought about the lack of wisdom of amending the Constitution for this purpose, in the middle of my mind, I could think of only one thing. I'll bet there are people going to watch this tonight on the evening news and say, there is some jerk from the ACLU who doesn't even know to come in out of the rain. But I soldiered on. And there were a lot of issues at that time. Even before I spent those 25 years with Americans United for separation of church and state, I was actively working at the ACLU with and found opposition to the strange dealings of the religious right, which is what we called them at the time. I had wonderful opportunities to have debates with virtually every religious right leader, which put me really in good stead when I was hired to run Americans United for Separation of Church and State, an organization that was in dire straits at that point. But I knew that there was an enormous impetus from my contacts at the ACLU and elsewhere to find an organization that it would feel like home for anyone, whether they were religious or non-religious, whether they were members of a majority religious faith or whether members of a minority religious faith. And sure enough, that's what happened. And I think that we did a lot at Americans United that was extremely important. Everything from filing a lawsuit to insist that Wiccans, people in the pagan religious movement, would be able to honor their fallen soldiers with a plaque of honor at a national cemetery. And it was a very rewarding experience the first time that it was a 4th of July that I had an opportunity, along with a Wiccan priestess, to commemorate the very first Christian pagan gravestone at the National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia. And we did a lot of other cases, including cases that involved prison ministries. Everybody, of course, thinks that people should be entitled to have a religious, a religious following from the organizations and from the people that they care about. But we found a prison out in the Midwest that had decided that it would give special privileges to prisoners who would go along with a very directive program run by a group called Prison Fellowship.
Hmm.
Prison Fellowship, if you joined it and you were willing to go through the machinations of following their dictates, you would get some important perks. At least they sounded important to me, like you could get a key to your own cell every night, which seemed like a good idea. But what they did was to take even model prisoners who would not go along with this. Was run by Chuck Colson, you may remember from the Nixon administration. And Colson just said, it's more important that they get my brand of religion than it is that they are good prisoners otherwise. And so they were unceremoniously thrown out of their favored positions. And we won that case as well. We also won a case early in my tenure on something which has just been declared void by our current president. And that was when a church took out an ad, a full page ad. At that time, it only cost $40,000 in USA Today and a bunch of other newspapers that said, Christian beware. This was when Bill Clinton was running for the presidency. Bill Clinton, it was said, had the following things, and there were, and we'll talk with John about this, proof texts for everything that the people who bought the ad thought were wrong-headed, were anti-Christian activities. And then at the very bottom it said, and if you vote for a sinner, you are a sinner too. And that violated the IRS code very substantially, which says you cannot spend any money, not a penny, advocating for the defeat or election of anyone for any public office. We asked the IRS to sue. They did, and we successfully managed to get that through not only a federal district court, but a federal appeals court as well. It's one of those things where even the most conservative Christians sometimes get very concerned about the idea that their house of worship is going to be turned into something like a political action committee. And it was that I think persuaded the church itself and its lawyers not even to take that case to the United States Supreme Court. Now, just weeks ago, the president has decided that this is terrific for everyone and all churches should be able to do it, and has instructed the Justice Department not to enforce that prohibition in the tax code. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And indeed,
That's
that's
true.
pretty much what's been happening these days in the
Yes.
United States House and Senate and
Yes.
the White House.
Yes. Thank you. I see that Jack is here. We're still waiting, everyone. I apologize. John was running from another meeting to jump on the Zoom, so he will be on shortly. We expect him just any minute now. So we thank you for your patience. I'm going to introduce for next here the president of the board of Advocates for Love and Religious Freedom, Jack Spur. Jack, if you could just talk for a moment, maybe about how this organization came to be and why.
Sure. Thank you very much, Ellen. I appreciate this opportunity, and I welcome you all to this program. I'm a member of UCC Norwell and co-chair of the Social and Racial Justice Ministry team, along with Kawa Shower, who is also on this call. And we first became aware of Christian nationalism and focused on it as a result of hearing about a conference that was done by the First Congregational Church in Williamstown, Massachusetts. It was entitled, "How Christian Nationalism, How It Harms All." And so that was in early 2021. So Williamstown was in it early. And on that panel were people from various religions, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, and one of the people on the panel was Reverend John Dorhauer, who was then president and general minister of UCC nationally, and also an author and an outspoken person with regard to Christian nationalism. So at that conference, actually, we didn't see it in 2021, but we did see it later, and we said, you know, this is inspirational. And we reached out to our friends in Williamstown, and in early 2023 met with them. Later that year, we reached out to Reverend John Dorhauer, and in DeKalb joined us in later in 2023. August of 24, we decided to form a nonprofit, Advocates for Love and Religious Freedom, and did so. We started with our first project, which was This is Christianity website and social media campaign, which we have up and running now. And our mission is to educate the general public, conduct programs, and take actions that bring together diverse groups united in preserving freedom in the United States and the fundamental rights of freedom of all people. And we believe in separation of church and state. We intend to include other religions and people of no religion at all, because we all are harmed by this, as our friends in Williamstown point out. This is Christianity is a Christian program meant to counter the hate and division and violence evident in Christian nationalism. And we want to do that by showing the love of God and love displayed by Jesus Christ. And so in July, we engaged Ellen Cobb Church, who you have already met, to act as our executive director. And we are really appreciative of Ellen joining our team. And we have improved the website and the social media program since she joined us, and we have a lot to do. But one of the things is to add more churches and other organizations and people to this effort. And so if there are any of you on here that would like to join us, please reach out. We may reach out to you as well. So thank you very much for joining, and I'll turn it over to Ellen again.
Thank you, Jack. We would love to have you check out our website. You can go to thisischristianity.org, or you can use the QR code. If you are on and you're representing a church in any way, please reach out to me after this, because we do have a lot of faith materials available, ways for churches to get involved. You won't have to reinvent the wheel to spread this message. We're doing it for you. We just need for you to help us get the message out. So thank you very much. And I'm going to check again. I'm really apologize. John's a very busy man. And so we are just grateful that he was able to put some time in for us tonight. And I'm just going to check and make sure that he's okay.
Okay.
Barry, maybe you
Yeah,
could do
John,
a little song or a dance or something
yeah,
while
well,
we're waiting.
probably not that, but something. John Fugelsang is, in my view, literally the greatest talk show host that the country has ever seen. I mean, I spent a lot of time with people like Larry King, but I'll tell you, John really has made up for lost time. He has done yeoman's work on making progressive politics and a progressive sense of religious and spiritual growth part of everything that he does. His new book is Separation of Church and Hate. I was honored to been asked to read one of the close to the final versions of it, along with Willie Nelson, who, if he were here, Willie were here, he could do a lot of singing and dancing. But it was the very first time I was on John Fugelsang's show. He was then on in the afternoons, and I went back and said, "This is the greatest talk show host I've ever been interviewed by, and here is John Fugelsang. John, welcome."
Hello. Sorry, I had a little bit of Zoom difficulty. I apologize for any
No,
delay.
no problem. Well, I've just been lauding your qualifications for everything. Let me just start with a couple questions, and then we'll
Thank
get
you,
some of
Reverend.
the other
Hello,
folks
everyone.
to.
Hi. Hi.
When you did a recent appearance on The Daily Show, you said to the interviewer, "I'm technically not supposed to be here," which didn't mean that you were somehow on the wrong show, but almost an existential question.
Yes,
You should
sir.
not have been here. What did you mean by that?
What I mean is that my parents both once made a promise to God that I would never happen. As some of your As some of y'all may know, I'm the child of two ex-Catholic clergy. My mother was a nun from the South who entered the convent right out of high school, and they put her through nursing school and sent her off to work with lepers in Malawi, Africa. My dad was a Franciscan brother. He taught history to Catholic boys and wore the brown robes and was like the lost Jedi of Flatbush. And when I knew my parents had been in the clergy and then left, but when I was 11, I learned what a vow of celibacy was. And that was when my first existential crisis began because I realized my parents had both once promised God that I would never happen. So yeah, to this day, I generally feel like I'm not supposed to be here most of the time. But that's my irony, right?
Absolutely.
Because of Christianity, I'm not supposed to be here, but because of Christianity, I got to be here. So I'm comfortable living with extremes.
Terrific. Well, one of the things that we often talk about on the radio is abortion, and I had I can't say pleasant experience of having debated the late Jerry Falwell at least 50 or 75 times. And most people think Jerry Falwell started out being concerned about abortion, which he didn't start out doing. He started out trying
Oh,
to preserve the tax exemptions for religious private schools, many of which at the time wanted to admit no African Americans. But
correct.
then he discovered abortion was a pretty big draw and made it possible for him to join with the most conservative Catholic clergy. But abortion, it's not even mentioned in the Bible, is
I
it?
mean, well, I mean, there's debate about that. But Numbers chapter 5 is God giving rather specific and gruesome tips to induce miscarriage in unfaithful pregnant wives. The only specific mention of an abortion in the Bible appears to be the directions how to do one. And it's kind of a psychotic hazing scene in Numbers 5. If a man suspects his wife is pregnant by another man, he brings her to church and they bind her hair back and they sweep up the sawdust on the floor and make a bitter water concoction that the woman has to eat, drink. The woman is mutilated, her body is distorted, and it's inducing miscarriage. It's very strange. Some people will be glad the woman has no choice, but you're right, Barry. When Roe v. Wade was made the law of the land, the most controversial thing was how not controversial it was. That
That's
abortion
right.
was seen as the thing the Catholics were all hung up about, but the Southern Baptist Conference, as you well know, they reaffirmed a woman's right to choose the year after Roe v. Wade was decided. Falwell, throughout the 70s, because Falwell was a
Mm,
segregationist, and I
mm,
never knew this as a kid watching him on TV. I didn't know Falwell had started whites only schools.
mm.
I knew he was a big fan of apartheid and hated Bishop Tutu, who my dad loved, but a lot of folks don't realize that Jerry Falwell never mentioned abortion in a single sermon until 5 years after Roe v. Wade. As you mentioned, Barry, in the 70s, their big mission, after they had lost their mojo with civil rights and Nixon had fallen, it was all about attacking Jimmy Carter's IRS for going after universities that still practiced racial segregation. These guys, by the late 70s, were still fighting for colleges to have segregation. And Ronald Reagan talked about Jimmy Carter's IRS even more than he
Mm.
talked about abortion in 1980. But after Reagan was elected and Bush Sr. overnight went from supporting abortion rights to Reagan asked him to be the running mate. The next day, Bush Sr. became
Yeah.
staunchly pro life. And ever since then, we've had two generations of Christian who have been raised in this country to think that the purpose of Christianity is to criminalize abortion,
Yeah.
and that's what we've got, right? They're trying to they threw out everything Jesus ever talked about to fight for something Jesus never taught. I'm not saying
Yeah.
he'd be pro-abortion, but
Right.
the Bible's not against it, and abortions are
No.
legal and free in Israel today because Christ's religion never bans them. He does ban the death penalty, but right-wing folks aren't really big fans of what Jesus actually said.
No, and in fact, the most recent Pope just 2 weeks ago said, if you are pro-life because you are against abortion, but you aren't also against the death penalty, you really are not pro-life.
Yeah. I actually said that to Reverend Falwell once. You know, he was bragging on Bill Maher how pro-life he was, and I said, "Well, you support the death penalty, so you're pro some life." But Barry, I was so impressed by this Pope. My God, my Southside Leo, the Chicago deep dish pontiff, this guy. You know, one thing we know about the popes, they really care about getting the money in the baskets on the weekends. It is a
Mhm.
business. Growing up Catholic, I noticed around the country how the really conservative priests were sent to the really conservative districts, and the pro-gay priests were sent to like the NYU Catholic Center where I went to college. And you
Mhm.
know, it's marketing. So for this Pope to come out and say that if you're for the death penalty, you're not pro-life, and then to come out and say, if you're supporting this persecution of migrants, you're not pro-life. This is a guy who's really concerned about the teachings of Jesus more than he's concerned about getting all people to put a lot of money in the collection plates this weekend. And that's what shocked me the most
Absolutely.
about it, Reverend.
We talk a little about immigration. I mean, immigration is a big issue around the country. Of course, I live now in Massachusetts. We have problems where local sheriffs have decided to expand, dramatically expand, fourfold in one case in Plymouth. Uh, the spaces available for persons in the local jail because they expect that they're going to be putting migrants there. Immigration, um, it bothers a lot of people, but it sure didn't bother Jesus.
Nor his dad, Barry, as you know better than
That's,
anyone.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm
When,
really a fan of talking about immigration these days. I know a lot of Democrats aren't, but I mean, to me, I don't know. What do you think? I mean, one of the things I discuss in Separation of Church and Hate is that, um, you know, if you're going by the Bible, it's pretty unambiguous. God doesn't really pussyfoot around on this. Now, I'm not saying that we should have amnesty or open borders. That's what Ronald Reagan said.
yep,
But my big issue, as we've discussed many times, Reverend, is this criminalization of migrants. You know, I mean, the Declaration of Human Rights says if you're standing on American soil, you're allowed to claim asylum.
that's
They
right.
go after the undocumented workers, but never the white people who do the hiring. You'll never see the Republican Party saying we'll a year in a federal pen for any white person who hires an undocumented. They never do it. There's a help
No,
wanted
they don't.
sign at our border, and the Republican Party will never take that help wanted sign down. That's how we know it's a racist scam. Trump carving out the agricultural workers. I mean, those illegals are safe, right? So
Yeah,
I don't call them illegals. I call them
no,
Christian refugees because that'll
right.
infuriate the right people. And I had this conversation with our friend Scott Jennings on CNN a couple of weeks ago. He was going off on the legal this, illegal that, and I said,
Mm.
you know, the God of the Old Testament commands us to welcome the stranger, commands the Israelites to treat the alien as one of your own and never mistreat the immigrant. Jesus goes a step beyond that in Matthew 25 and says that individuals and nations will be judged by how well they welcome the stranger. So the question I would say, what I said to Scott Jennings is, why should I listen to you and Donald Trump and reject the direct words of God and Jesus? I find, Reverend, and with this book, I tried to make it this way with your right wing and fundamentalist and nationalist loved ones. We don't always have to debate them. Make them debate Jesus. Make them debate God. They act like that book that like it's a prop of theirs that they own as they wave it over their head so bombastically. Well, Democrats in the media are terrified to question these folks about what's inside. So it's going to be
That's
up
right.
to us. Where does your holy book say repel the stranger? Where is the no room at the end Christianity coming from exactly? You know, again, it's like
Certainly.
I didn't write it.
No, not from the Bible. One of the people you talk about in the book, Separation of Church and Hate, is Pastor Jeffress. Jeffress is a Texas Baptist, and I know him quite well because he was a person who began a process that led to me being the subject of imprecatory prayers. Imprecatory prayers are prayers for your death or your disease or the death of your family.
Yeah,
And
there
I
you
had
go.
complained Mr. Jeffress once, when I discovered that he was actually offering the following suggestions to his congregation: go to the library, he said, and pick out any books that, he had a list of them, books that might be too gay friendly, that put gay people in a positive light, and
Mhm.
take it out and never return it. I wrote him, I said, Pastor Jeffress, God doesn't think well of that. It's called theft. There's even a commandment against it. So he got one of his friends out in California to pray imprecatory prayers against me. And he's a not a very pleasant individual.
No, he's
Then he
not.
no, but he also then suggested that if once you steal the books, then you go to the local library board or the city council, and when they consider replacing the books, you object strenuously, which I think is possibly worse than stealing it in the first place.
I mean, if this guy would just read the
Mm.
Jesus parts and follow those, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But they're not here to they're here to fight for Jesus, not to listen to him.
No, absolutely not. Um, Here's something else that it prompts me to think about Jeffress again. And as I said before you got on, you were kind enough to have me read an earlier draft of your book,
Yes, sir.
and Willie Nelson did too. And he can sing, and I can't, and wouldn't think about it. But
You and Willie Nelson were the first two people I asked to look at this thing, by the
yeah,
way, Barry. I
yeah.
want you to know.
Well, I have every Willie Nelson album. Does that surprise you? I don't think so.
Wow. No, it does. He's put out like 100. That's great.
I know. I'm a big collector of music. Um, Now, a lot of people say, well, look, yeah, we understand Jesus said these things, but what about these writings of St. Paul? I mean, he says, for example, respect the governing authorities. And that's always great if you're Ronald Reagan or George Bush or Donald
Mhm.
Trump. Not so true if you're a Democrat president,
Yeah.
then you're not supposed to do that. So that's just patent
Yeah.
hypocrisy. What
Well, but
else could it be?
they don't mean any of it, Reverend. Let's be honest now. I mean, they don't mean any of it, okay? This is right-wing Christianity. They don't care about the teachings of Christ. They don't care about religious freedom. They don't care about the things Jesus tells us to treat each other. They don't care about scripture. They care about conservative Christian domination of culture and society. That's what they care about. That is what they prioritize, right? And with the leaders, with the politicians, I mean, that's all they care about is power. If conservative Christian politicians really cared about abortion, they'd fight for greater access to birth control. They'd
Hmm.
fight for more sex ed in the schools. If they really cared about undocumented immigration, they'd care about locking up the white people who do all the hiring. They don't. They care about power, and they use these issues to get power. And this is the problem with our MAGA friends. This is fundamentalism, Barry, and I've learned so much
Yep.
about fundamentalism from you. It is the far right wing strain of all religions that is ruining all religions. The incredibly extreme right wing Jews, right wing Muslims, right wing Christians, they're the ones that are ruining all the world's great religions. They're the ones that are turning off young people to the concept of organized religion. They're the ones who are so sure that God likes them better, that anything they do is sanctioned by God, that they don't really have time to read their holy books about how you're supposed to treat each other. And Jeffress is a perfect example of it. I ask our MAGA friends all the time, Reverend, can you please tell
Yep.
me one teaching of Christ that Donald Trump fights for? Because
Yep.
Jesus is their mascot. They can't do it. They'll say abortion. I'm like, that's not a teaching of
No,
Christ. They'll
no,
say a strong border. I'm like, no, Jesus said,
no.
welcome the stranger. The third most common thing I get is, Trump moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. And I get
Yeah,
this, and I've got to say, no, Jesus never mentions the United
no, he
States
doesn't.
or where our future embassy should be in 2000 years in the year 33 AD. They haven't read it,
Never.
Barry. They haven't read it,
No,
and they're counting
no.
on the rest of us not having read it as well.
That's right. One of the things about this book, I can't emphasize this enough. I mean, I said it was a bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list, the LA Times list, the Amazon list, but it's an important book because it allows you, and you are not a theologian. You say that very clearly, but I
Yes.
can tell, I would trade you for about 500 of the scholars, so-called scholars on the religious right. Now,
Well,
here's
thank you.
something else, though. Now, Massachusetts, again, where I live, we're a pretty wealthy state. in many parts of the state, but a pretty poor place in others. So this is not a golden era for everyone living in every part of New England.
Yeah.
But what about that Jesus remark? The poor you shall always have with you. They always throw that back. The poor you shall always have with you. What's
Yeah, I
that
know.
mean? What's that mean?
I mean, it's a, it's a cop out. When Jesus says the poor you'll always have with you, for one, he is referencing Isaiah, where a similar thing is said in Isaiah. But when people say, "Well, the poor I'll always have with you," that's used as some sort of way to abandon the struggle, right? Like, well, they'll always be here, so really, what's the point? And again, Jesus tells us in Matthew 25 that his true followers are the individuals and societies that care for the poor and the immigrant and the marginalized. A lot of our right-wing friends will say, "Well, Jesus said to take care of the poor." But that's the job of Christians and churches. He didn't say government should do it. They all have that same line. Never said government's
Yes.
supposed to hold a gun to my head and force me to. And as you know, Reverend, when our friends say Jesus says we're supposed to do these things, not the government, that's the right wing argument for rejecting everything Jesus says when you're in the voting booth. Laws and
Exactly.
policies can be
Exactly.
designed to address systemic inequalities and promote social justice. Jesus never had democracy. We do. So our conservative friends vote for a government that cuts services for the poor, has no plans to help the sick, demonizes the stranger, and wants harsher treatment for the incarcerated. So my whole thing is, when does the Christian part come in? Exactly. Where
Exactly.
where where is Christ exactly in all of this? And so when Jesus says the poor will always have you, that's not an abdication of responsibility to say, well, let's just be passive and give up the struggle. Quite the opposite. That's Jesus saying that the struggle always goes on. And when he says it in the context of the story, it's the night before he dies. And the woman is there to anoint his feet. And Judas is mad. That money could have gone to the poor. And he goes, hey, the poor you'll always have with you. She's here for me. It's just Jesus recognizing the fleeting moment that his life's about to end. And when he says the poor you'll always have with you, he's saying in the opposite, you won't have me past Friday.
Exactly.
So again,
Exactly.
they take it out of
Exactly.
context and just say, well, the poor you'll always have with you. So really, what's the point? What's on TV? And it's another abdication of Jesus's direct marching orders.
One of the very last times that you and I were on MSNBC together was one Saturday, and I was about to get an honorary doctorate at the Chicago Theological Seminary.
Mm,
And the lecturer was a guy who had a CNN show about minority religions. And his whole speech was about the book of James. And I love the book of
I do
James, but
too. James
very
is
few
hardcore.
people. Yeah, James, probably the brother of Jesus. We're not 100% sure, but we think he is.
We think he is.
And he's but this fellow is one of the reasons I don't talk about him is because he's the only place in the scriptures where you can find definitively a statement like this: faith without works is dead.
Boom.
But you've got some other comments that James made in the book that are equally good reasons for why Christian nationalism doesn't like the letter of James.
I mean, you don't really hear them trying to. Well, that's the thing. The Christian nationalists, you never hear them trying to put Jesus quotes on the side of a courthouse, Barry, do you? You
No,
don't see them try to
never.
put Jesus quotes on a classroom wall. No, they want kids to know not to covet your neighbor's wife. That's important. Um, Donald Trump has violated all 10 of the 10 commandments, and they really want to put them in schools so kids will know, oh, my parents don't take this list seriously. They voted for that guy. James, though, I mean, look, and Jesus is completely is anti-wealth. Watch out, be on your
Yeah,
guard against all kind of
yeah,
greed. Life
yeah.
does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Something camel needle. But James, I mean, in James chapter
Mm,
5, he goes, now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the
mhm.
misery that is coming on you. Your wealth is rotted, moths have eaten your clothes, your gold and silver are corroded. That corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You have hoarded wealth in the last days. The wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying again. It's like a Yelp review for Donald Trump. I mean, you have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. Let's post that on a schoolhouse wall.
You
James,
got it.
brother of Jesus, they share some DNA, right, Barry? They share
Ab-
some DNA, those guys.
Absolutely, absolutely do. Um, the I want to get to some of our questions that are coming in from the folks in the Zoom. Um, I did want to mention one other thing. There is a sermon I give occasionally called "The Two Worst Ways to Make Public Policy Decisions: Bible Literalism and Constitutional Originalism."
Oh man.
Now, as we know, lots of people claim to be Bible literalists, and there
Oh
are a
yes.
few. I used to do a radio show with a guy who was on the fringes of Christian nationalism. He was a Christian
What?
Reconstructionism, as a
Bible
Christian.
literalist? So he
No, no,
stoned people for working on Saturday?
he would have if he had had the stones. I don't think he did. But he never wore clothes of mixed fabric. He never ate lobster. He never ate pork. He literally lived the life that he wanted the law to require for
Everyone
everyone.
else, yeah. Well, that's
Bible
good.
literalism, pretty weird, because if you look at it seriously, as you do in the book, you find that in Leviticus there are all these strange admonitions. There's 613 uh, prohibitions. Most of them are prohibitions. As, don't wear clothing of mixed fabric. Don't touch certain insects. But nobody
Yeah.
seriously does that. There is no Christian, Jew, or anyone else who obeys all of those, except possibly my late and lamented co-host, a guy named John Lofton.
Mm, yeah.
If you have questions, put them in the Q&A box, please, and we'll
I
get to
mean,
them in
I
just a
have a
minute.
hard time believing I have a whole chapter in the book called "Thou shalt not take all of this literally,"
Yep.
because I don't think it's possible to take it all literally. There are so many inconsistencies in the text, and it's no sin to use the reasoning and critical thinking God hath given us to say, well, Genesis chapter 1, God makes man and woman at the same time in his own image. Genesis chapter 2, God makes man first and then makes Eve later out of his rib. Which one is it? I mean, they can't both be true. So,
No.
and again, what does it have to do with the teachings of Jesus? That was always my thing as a kid. What is belief, literal belief in a talking snake? What is
One of my
believing that God made heaven and earth in 6 days but couldn't find the two naked people hiding in the woods? What does literal belief in Genesis have to do with what the commandments Christ gives on how to treat each other? I don't think the people who wrote Genesis intended it to be taken literally. And
I don't think so either.
and Jesus's whole mission, he speaks in parable and metaphor. Why is it so hard to view the Bible as parable and metaphor? The Bible, Reverend, we've talked about it, has a
Yep.
lot of truth. Maybe not a lot of
Sure.
facts, maybe not a lot of
Yep.
facts, but a lot of truth. And if Jesus spoke in parable and metaphor, I don't know why it's so difficult to read the rest of the book that way.
Occasionally, there are critics of Christian nationalism who themselves will cite writings of Paul, for example, and act like, well, Paul didn't condemn slavery. Well, Paul, of course, as you know, thought literally Jesus was coming again. In fact,
That's
he
right.
refers to the inbreaking of the Spirit, meaning he thought he could see himself just decades after Jesus' death,
That's
a
right.
return of Jesus. So you can't divorce that from the time in which he was writing.
Paul thought the world was going to end in his
Yep.
lifetime and that all men should be celibate like him. Paul condemns heterosexual lust as much as he condemns same-sex lust. He thinks it's debased and beneath us all. And we don't know if Paul had a wife or not. There's a lot of speculation we can have
Mm.
about Paul and why he's so hung up on his own unholy urges he can't control so well. But yeah, when the Council of Nicaea decided that Paul's letters about Scripture count as Scripture, I say in the book, it was like, so when Paul wrote all scripture is God breathed, he's saying all the wisdom of the Hebrew scripture is full of God. Suddenly they made his letter about scripture, scripture. I say in the book, it's like if they said Roger Ebert's review of The Godfather is now officially part of The Godfather's original script. So this then means that Paul talking about
Mhm.
the Holy Scripture is Holy Scripture, and it's allowed two generations of people who don't like Jesus's lack of homophobia and who don't like the fact that Jesus treats women as equals. Well, there's Paul. It's in the Bible. And so now Paul speaks for,
Exactly.
it's not Paul talking about God, it's Paul speaking for God. And
For
you
God.
know these
Absolutely.
it's in the Bible. Christians, well, Jesus
Yep.
doesn't say it's in the Bible somewhere. So yeah, that's why you'll hear him say there's rules against homophobia, rules against
Yeah.
being gay in the New Testament. Well, it's Paul, not
Yeah.
Jesus. Homophobia is a
Correct.
violation of the Sermon on the Mount. You
Of
can't hate
course
him.
it is.
You got to
Of
love him.
course it is. We got a question from Katrina. And Katrina, can you sign in with us, or
Hi,
is
Katrina.
somebody going to read you the question? What are we doing?
We're working out the kinks.
We're working out the kinks. Kinks. You ever see the
I
kinks?
can read it for
Yeah,
you,
Ah,
John.
please.
This is Ellen.
Okay.
hello,
What
Ellen.
is
Thank you.
hi? What is your take on Moms for Liberty trying to get people elected to school committees in order to push things like book bans and neutrality in the classroom?
They are fascists and they're not fighting for anything Jesus talked about. You know, that's it. I mean, God bless Mr. Kirk, but I go to
Mm.
Turning Point USA's website. I've never seen anything about helping the poor. Nothing. They don't follow Jesus. Their religion is conservative Christian power. That's their religion. They are fundamentalists, and the fundamentalists of all religions. And haven't our Muslim friends shown us this?
Mm.
They think that God likes them better, so they should run everything. They should run culture. It's not that they're better than you. God thinks they're better than you. And if you're opposing me, then you must be representing Satan. And I'm not going to sit down and negotiate school curriculum with Satan. This is why fundamentalism is very bad in Muslim societies, Jewish societies, and Christian societies, as we have witnessed so often. And Moms for Liberty, well, they're not for liberty. They're not for freedom. They don't like the liberty, say, of a transgender person to live in a life of freedom and liberty in a society that lets them be who they really are. They don't fight for these things. They fight for conservative Christian domination of the school board. Jesus's whole movement is about humility, servant leadership. The last shall be first, going to the margins and uplifting those who are less fortunate than you. He's not about total right-wing domination of your local school board or local government. So Moms for Liberty are falling into the age-old right-wing Christian trap of aligning with power and authority instead of challenging it, and siding with the most powerful instead of fighting for the least of us. I just ask them, what teaching of Jesus are you guys fighting for? And you'll find out how little Moms for Liberty knows about the Bible. And they're counting on you not knowing it either.
Mm. The censorship issue is something that I worked on both at the ACLU and at Americans United,
Thank you
the
for it.
separation of church and state. And one of the most challenged books when I was working every day on this was Charlotte's Web, which is a book, of course, about a pig and a spider who have a relationship, not a sexual relationship, just they're friends, but they both talk. And if you ask them, well, why do you want to censor this world famous children's classic? They would say, um, because there are no talking animals in the Bible. But as you mentioned about 10 minutes ago, what about that snake? That was pretty powerful.
Yeah, Balaam's
So,
donkey talks as
well,
well.
I'm, yeah, indeed,
No idea
indeed.
what that has to do with Jesus' teachings, but a talking donkey. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
One of the very last things I was invited to do, which I declined to do, was to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to be on Fox and Friends. And I said, well, what's the subject? And they said, well, we have a guy who writes cartoons. He produces cartoons called Veggie Tales.
Oh,
Veggie
yeah.
Tale. That's
Yeah.
talking vegetables act out Bible stories. Now, you didn't go to seminary, but I did go to seminary, and I must have missed the time when they taught why talking animals, that was bad. Talking vegetables, just great, particularly if they tell Bible stories.
I never heard this business about Charlotte's Web. My goodness, it's just ridiculous. The kind of stuff that these people want to keep kids from reading. Charlotte's Web is a beautiful story about people who are different, learning to love each other, and
Of
maybe that's what
course,
freaked them out so much. Or maybe
it
it's
could
just that
well.
it's, kind of anti-eating ham. Maybe they're just Orthodox Jews. Who knows? But the whole point is to not turn this pig into bacon. So who knows? Maybe they're Orthodox.
Exactly. It
But
could be.
but yeah, it's like, I say in the book, if your church isn't telling you to love your enemies, but your church is
Mm,
telling you who your enemies are,
yeah,
you're not really in a church.
right, right. You're
Here,
definitely somewhere else.
Yeah,
here we have
Ellen,
another
you got a
question.
sure.
Yeah.
please.
I can read it. It's from Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer. She says, I attended a local church conference for Black churches on Saturday. There were people of diverse ethnicities in attendance, which was good to see. However, when we got to the part of the conference where we discussed the issues of the day that we, the Black church, need to address, the few white people got up and quietly left. How do we get predominantly white churches to join the fight against white Christian nationalism? Which is a great question.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, it's a
eh,
great question. I, you'd think they would be. I mean, Barry, you've spoken so beautifully about how Christian
mm,
nationalism, which is what Hitler did, but
mm.
how it's idolatry. I mean, again, you're putting your nation above others. That's the opposite of everything Christ talks about. I was on Piers Morgan with some right-wing Christian last week trying to get me to badmouth the Muslims. And I'm like, you really need to believe
Mm.
that God likes you better than a whole other religion, don't you? That you're going to heaven and they're all going to burn in hell. And oh, they'd be so angry if there were Muslims in heaven with
Oh,
that would ruin heaven's property value, Barry.
it would.
I mean, it's a great question because I don't know if you can get white churches to do it. I think it's got to be individual souls one by one. But if I was in the Black church, you know how I would do it? I'd ask them. I'd
Yeah.
ask them for help because there are
Yeah,
so many terrific white
exactly.
people and even lame white people like me who are not cool but really want to be part of the solution. So many lame white people who wish they had more Black friends who want to be part of something progressive. And by the way, I extend this to atheists as well. I'm speaking to the atheist
Sure,
convention this weekend because
sure.
it's going to take the non-believers and the Christ followers working together to beat back the fundamentalists and fascists. But I think it's a beautiful question, and I think Black churches need to reach out to white churches. Trust me. Yes, there'll be some who won't come, but there's
That's
so
right.
many people who want to have a bigger community and want to be part of the solution. And let's be honest, a lot of these white people listen to terrible music. They need cooler friends. So, please, Black churches, reach out. And you'll be surprised at how many people do want to help. And I would
You
say
got it.
if churches don't want to help, then do it on social media in groups and just go for Christians in online groups and you'll get people who will show up and want to put their body in the movement alongside you. And that's what it's going to
And
take.
yes, thank you. And Jennifer, I would say that's what we're trying to do with Advocates for Love and Religious Freedom. And this is Christianity. So I
Mm,
would love for you to connect with me. I'll email you when we're done and find ways that we can work with you and your church to bring in more Black churches and white churches because
Great.
it's working together that's going to make it happen. So
Yeah.
thank you again for your question. Thank you for the answer, John.
And they need us to be divided and conquered, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they need it.
absolutely.
This right-wing strain of Jesus-free Christianity, they
Mm,
hate conversations like this. They hate us liberals talking about what the gospels actually say versus what they
Mhm.
believe the gospels say. And so it's going to just take more of us because again, the media is going to be too afraid to ever
Yeah.
challenge these people on their homophobia and their bigotry, and the Democratic Party is going to be too afraid to do it as well. It's going to be
Yeah.
up to us to convince our neighbors and coworkers and loved ones that, hate's not a Christian value.
mm.
Right.
Do you have any other questions that you'd like to read to us?
Oops.
I
Do we have
don't
any more
see any right
questions?
now, but anyone
No
that
worries.
wants to
Yeah,
send one in, we would love to have it.
there's
One
an
thing,
or
uh,
go
one
ahead.
thing, if I can ask a question.
Sure.
Yeah.
John, I love the part of the book where you talk about how the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus's Woodstock and Matthew 25 is his Live Aid.
Yes.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that because I think that really gets to the core too of what we're talking about tonight.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, I feel like for so many of us in this country and the way we're raised, Jesus is three things: the manger, the miracles, and the cross, and not the three
Mm,
years he spent preaching and teaching and healing and telling us what a Christian nation would have to do to actually earn that label. Um, and for me, the greatest proof of his power is that Jesus's teachings are still so threatening to authoritarian power systems as much now as they were 2,000 years ago. So I say in the book that Sermon on the Mount is really Jesus's most famous live appearance. It's like his Woodstock, and again, the whole point of it is humility over any kind of spiritual superiority. It's love your enemies, do not judge, the golden rule, all the beatitudes, and it focuses all on the poor, the marginalized, nonviolence, radical love, mercy, inclusion. I know I sound like Donald Trump, right? But it's like it's all woke social justice for the disadvantaged. And the beatitudes are Jesus's own guide for ethical conduct in Christian life. And you will never see a right-wing Christian politician or group fight to put those words of Jesus on a classroom or a courthouse wall. But for me, Matthew 25, yeah, I say it's Live Aid because it's not as famous as Woodstock, but it's much bigger in scope. And I also say, Barry, the Crusades were Jesus's Altamont. That's a real inside joke,
Yeah.
but that's another book.
Yeah.
But Matthew 25 obviously is the most important parable Jesus does, the judgment of nations. It's literally Jesus explaining how all the nations will gather before him and be judged and evaluated based on how they treated certain people. And it's the kind of story you'd think conservative Christians would focus on. But the people he says that you have to focus on are the poor, the sick, the stranger, and the incarcerated. That's it. That's what Christianity was supposed to be about, not abortion or blocking care for trans kids or hating Muslims or fighting for tax cuts or believing in a talking snake. Jesus tells you his true followers are the individuals in societies who care for the poor, the sick, the immigrant, the incarcerated. And he tells you his fake followers are the ones who are openly religious, but indifferent to the poor, the marginalized, the immigrants, and the incarcerated. How we treat the lowest of the low is how we treat him. I mean, he gave us cliff notes. It's like he gave a whole script to the Heritage Foundation and they wouldn't read it. So it's like it's right there, man. And so, again, you want to call them illegals and be a no room at the inn Christian? Where's that in the book? We can do it without hating them, without fighting them, just asking questions and take the book back that way. Take away their camouflage. You won't convince the fundamentalists, but Barry, you know this. You will convince their kids, their wives, other people at the cookout. If you can debate without hostility, if you can model this, ask questions, don't get angry, you may have to turn the other cheek. Nobody hates like a Christian who's just been told their hate isn't Christian, but go ahead and let him call you. I was on a Piers Morgan last week. This guy kept calling me, you viper, you viper.
Viper.
Finally, I was like, dude, keep calling me, hit the other cheek. I can take it. And he got what I was saying right away. I'm not going to call you names back. I'm not going to hate you back. I'm here to win over everybody else at the cookout, even if I can't win over you.
We have another question, which actually kind of goes along a little bit with what we're saying about how to reach out to folks.
Please.
This is from Jack. It seems like your way to communicate with humor would be helpful engaging younger people and families who are really hard to reach. That's not who's sitting in the pews in most churches, right? Families, young
Correct.
people. Any thoughts that you have on how to reach young people with humor or I guess without would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, Billy Wilder said, if you're going to tell people the truth, make it funny or they'll kill you. And that's my favorite quote as a political comedian. If I'm up here being preachy and railing against fascists, but I'm not being funny, it's over, right? And when I was writing this book, I began the first drafts reading it to my wife, who would just sit there and say, I'm bored. It's not funny. It's not funny. If I got like half a page without a joke, I'd be like, you're trying to write like a clergy or like an academic, and you're not. I'm bored. It's not funny. So, I mean, I tried to stay in my own lane in that sense, but it is a great way to reach young people. But, a lot of people will say, let's reach young people with the youth mass. And it's just so forced and patronizing. And kids can read the desperation and smell how thirsty folks are and get turned off. But look, here's the deal. If we can talk about Jesus as who he actually was and not some marble statue, people aren't leaving church because they don't like God or Jesus or Noah's Ark or Santa Claus. They're leaving because they don't like the cruelty and the hypocrisy. And these people who don't treat others the way Jesus tells us to treat others. And in the 90s, we were what, 90% Christian in this country?
Yeah.
For decades after decades after decades, 90%, 90%, 90%. Now we're around 65%. And in 2022, that was the first year that church and temple and synagogue and mosque attendance dripped below 50%. So the young people are leaving, and churches have a choice, right? You can go more right wing, like many are, and just keep trying to double down on the hate and the Trumpism and the immigrant hate and the Muslim hate and the liberal hate and the feminist hate and the I don't want no skinny woke Christ these homoerotic idiots and you know, and look, yeah, the racists are out there, but they're dying off.
Yeah.
And we're witnessing now the last ugliest part of the 20th century coming back for one last horror movie scare. But I mean, young people today can't believe how homophobic everybody was at the turn of the
Right.
century. In 20 years, young people aren't going to believe how anti-trans we all were back in the 20s.
That's right.
So I do believe people are getting more decent. If you had told me in the 90s that we'd have gay marriage and a black president and we wouldn't be putting people in prison for weed, I wouldn't have believed it. If they want to keep young people, here's the deal. Talking about being proper stewards of the earth and the environment and the air, the land, the water,
Mhm.
civil rights, justice, fighting for the less fortunate, protecting women's reproductive rights, not hating other groups, not discriminating, not picking on other people, staying out of people's private lives and not judging folks for their sexuality, but fighting here for justice and for better rights and access to healthcare for the less fortunate. These are all really popular with young people, and they all align perfectly with the teachings of Christ. So if your church is serious about lasting, I would recommend embrace the actual stuff Jesus talked about. All that social justice woke stuff, I mean, it's going to be more relevant than ever. But if you're making your whole faith about how we're better than others because we believe this, we believe in 2,000-year-old supernatural accounts of healing the dead, and they don't even mention his teachings. I mean, coerced belief in 2,000-year-old supernatural accounts is no way to spread a religion. But the teachings of Christ, they cross all ecclesiastical lines because anybody of any faith can recognize the wisdom in blessed are the meek, that the kingdom of God is at hand. He said that with the Roman soldiers watching him. I mean, when you put it in context, this guy was so anti-empire, and his messages are really popular with young people. The problem is we always sell it to young people as, don't you want to be a good person and get into heaven and have
Mm.
community and make your mom happy? And how many young people go to church to make their parents happy to begin with? But what about the values you care about? And for me, that's a great way of hooking in young people and people in their 20s. You know, Charlie Kirk, God bless him, he was paid a lot of money to normalize white supremacy for college students and make white supremacy seem normal for people in their 20s. Paid a lot of money to do that. I'm saying let's get our hands dirty and talk about the stuff Jesus really talked about, because that's going to save religion. Being mean to gay people, that doesn't have much of a shelf life.
No, it does not.
And young people
No.
don't want it. They don't want to be
Mm.
mean to Muslims. They don't want to be mean to immigrants.
No, they
I mean,
don't.
some of them do, sure, but that ain't Jesus. And selling
No.
false religion, it doesn't last. It's all just for earthly power.
Well, John, thank you very much for doing this and for answering the questions. And I know you've got to do a radio show, and I want to plug it again. Tell Me Everything. It's on Sirius XM, and it runs from 9
To
till
midnight.
midnight
That's my
Eastern.
penance, Barry.
Eastern.
Yes.
And there it is. There's the book.
I don't
Ellen's.
know if you can see it. Thank
Yeah.
This
you.
is my penance. Thank you. I'm so honored. Ellen, thank you, and thank everybody
Thank you.
watching. I'm
Oh, you're
sorry.
Absolutely.
welcome.
Sorry I was a little bit late, but yes,
No problem.
I'm on the
Thank
radio
you.
till midnight tonight, and then I'm up at 5 in the morning to do Joe Scarborough tomorrow, and then I'll be going all day tomorrow until Abby Phillip on CNN till midnight. It's such a
Super.
busy time, but I've
Wonderful.
always believed that there is an audience for this kind of stuff, that there are so
Absolutely.
many folks who were raised Christian and feel like the faith's been hijacked, and that's who I wrote this
Yeah.
book for. And I'm just so honored to come here, and I would do
Terrific.
anything for Reverend Barry. So thank you, Ellen.
Well,
Thank you.
we're
Thank you.
so grateful that you made time for us. And Kim put in the Q&A that she ordered your book and is looking forward to reading it. And I recommend that everybody on here tonight, if you don't already own the book, buy it. I was laughing out loud in the dentist office waiting room.
Fabulous.
And it just makes sense. So John, thank you again so much for spending time with us. We
Ellen,
really
you made
appreciate
my
it.
night. Thank you. Geez, you're thinking me. Thank you. And I haven't laughed at a dentist office in a few decades, so thanks. That's a new level of achievement for me. Reverend, thank you for all you do, and
Thank you.
thank you for inspiring me so much, and for all
I
you prod to
appreciate
my
that.
listeners at SiriusXM. And if you all don't have Sirius, I have a free podcast as well, and I'm all on the socials. And please feel free to write and say hi. I try to write back to everyone.
Thank you
Super.
so much. And thanks to
Thank
everyone
you
who
both.
joined us.
Thank you.
We'll send you an email tomorrow with additional info. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Peace.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
All right.